Chief Master Sergeant Nicole Johnson, the Chief of the Air Force Wounded Warrior Program. Mitchell Keiffer, founder and principal of Hard Changer Coaching. Joshua Smith, Aircrew Flight Equipment Specialist. And Dr. Raymond Crawford III, Senior Clinical Scientist at Leidos. So similar to our last panel, we'll ask each of our panelists to give a few brief remarks about their specific area of focus, and then we'll open it up to your questions. And hopefully we'll have as many questions as we did for the last panel. So we'll turn it over first to General Crider.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. So it's a real pleasure to be here. Just real quickly for me. So as was mentioned in the introduction, so I'm the mobilization assistant to the Undersecretary of the Air Force, and you might be asking yourself, what does that have to do with invisible wounds? Well, the Undersecretary of the Air Force, Secretary of the Air Force, Chief of Staff, and the Vice Chief of Staff have determined that addressing this problem of invisible wounds is so critical to our Air Force. If you were in the town hall meeting panel just a little while ago, you saw at least the Chief and the Secretary speak on this, quite poignantly as they were referencing the issue of suicide. Suicide and invisible wounds are not exactly the same, but there certainly is a connection there. And we've got to get at these challenges. We've got to get at the problem of people who have invisible wounds, people who go from being hopeful to hopeless. And it's so important to them that they have asked that a general officer provide some leadership and oversight to help ensure that the initiatives, the programs are actively being worked. And it's been my great honor for at least almost a year now to have had that role and to really help work with the team, the core team that's addressing many of these challenges today, and we'll talk a little bit more of that as we go, working very closely with the Air Force Wounded Warrior Program and with industry and academia and finding ways to really get at this. So that's what I do. I have the great honor of going out and meeting with airmen and their families who have invisible wounds. I spend a lot of time talking to commanders and first sergeants and other members of units to learn more about where this problem really exists and are we doing the right things? Are we really doing enough to get at it? And that's why I'm here.
Thank you, ma'am. So at the Wounded Warrior Program, what we try to do is identify those individuals with any type of invisible wound, not just PTSD, TBI, an individual with a tick-borne illness, for example, an endocrine problem, fibromyalgia, and identify them early and get them into our program so that we can connect them and their caregiver with resources. We can advocate for them for care, for specialized care, for treatment, connect them with any type of caregiver resources. For those of you in the audience who maybe were a first-time parent at one time and you bought that book, What to Expect When You're Expecting, yeah? There's no book on how to live with an invisible wound. There's no book to tell a caregiver what to expect when your spouse or your family member comes home with an invisible wound and goes from living every day as happy as can be to forgetting to turn off the stove, to forgetting your name, to forgetting simple things or not knowing how to cope with a day-to-day living. There's no guidebook to tell you as a caregiver how to do that. There's no guidebook to the airmen to tell them how to get past each day knowing that every day is going to be a challenge. So what we try to do is connect them as early as possible and to teach their caregivers how they can cope and to connect them with resources, as well as to advocate for that airman and their family to get the proper care that they need. So we're doing everything that we can to identify them and get them enrolled in our program sooner. And then we care for them all the way through transition out of the military, if that's what ends up happening, or to retain or retrain them if we can, up to through their temporary disabled retirement or permanent retirement, up to 6 months past that. And even if, long after retirement, if they have a problem with the VA, we do get contacted, and sometimes we engage if we are able to do that. And even through these last 2 hurricanes, if they had a problem with evacuating or if they had a problem with resources, they contact us and we connect them with someone in their community to make sure that they have assistance. So it doesn't stop at diagnosis. It doesn't stop at separation. We keep them engaged as long as we possibly can throughout.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mitchell Keiffer, and I had a unfortunate event when I had volunteered to go downrange with the Army. In 2011, I was hit by an EFP, explosive form penetrating IED. It blasted through my vehicle about 2 feet in front of my forehead, knocked me unconscious. Mainly just the blast wave itself gave me shaken baby syndrome. And I woke up to a barrage of gunfire and RPGs flying everywhere. And little did I know at that time, it wasn't really that initial blast or that initial injury that was going to plague me. It's really been all the follow-on from the invisible wound. So at that point, I was Forrest Gump. And I'd always been a pretty intelligent guy. I had a spot for AFIT. I was going to be an operations research analyst, and luckily I was able to complete that degree. But at the time, I could barely even understand what, the British contractors I was with were joking around with me for. If they would simply say, hey, what's going on, man, I would have to listen to what they said. I would process it through my mind, figure out what kind of message were they getting across, how I felt about that message, then how I would possibly respond to it, and then I would respond. And that entire time that I'm telling it is how long I just sat there with a blank stare on my face, knowing that it was happening, but having no control over it, just to say nothing's going on. So needless to say, I lost a lot of the banter after that. But over time, what I realized is that with all the different medical techniques and drugs that they prescribe for a lot of these things, the traumatic brain injury, and also I broke 7 vertebrae in that event. So the pain meds and all that, all it did was just mask symptoms, and really it was like the Air Force Wounded Warrior program, providing empowerment, providing purpose, along with simple learning. That master's degree, I would start off doing an assignment for 7 hours, simple statistics, and then by the end of that year and a half, all the mental workouts were bringing me closer and closer to what everyone else was at, hour and a half, 2 hours for those assignments. And hyperbaric oxygen therapy, so just breathing oxygen really at a pressure, was what took my headaches away from nonstop 24/7 feeling like I was hanging upside down with all the blood rushing to my head. And that was even started 3.5 years after my injury. So what I've found is that a lot of these natural kind of ways to be ingrained back in society and help actually lead others, being more selfless, being more of a mentor with this program now, has been the best therapy for myself.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is retired Tech Sergeant Joshua Smith. I was a life support and aircrew flight equipment specialist. Back in June '08, I went to combat survival school, non-parachuting water survival training, and helicopter egress dunker training at Fairchild Air Force Base. During my week portion of, the last week portion of combat survival school was POW camp, and during that POW camp, I was one of the unlucky individuals that was shoved down and placed in a 3 feet culvert, 3 feet down in the ground in a culvert, just in a tight ball type situation. And I felt a tear in my right hip, a tear in my shoulder. My back went out on me. Had issues with my neck when I got out as well. And eventually, didn't say anything. I'm in my last week of training. I just want to graduate and complete my training courses. And when I got home, I ended up going to the doc and talking about all the issues that I was having. So to this day, I have 2 full hip replacements. I have a severe thoracic neck strain. I have thoracic columbar disease in my lower spine, issues with 4 of the discs in my lower spine, which eventually will need surgery at some point. And then I have degenerative arthritis and joint disease in every major joint inside my body. I had planned on, doing the 20+ years. I ended up medically retiring in November 16 after 13 years of active duty. And wasn't quite the way that I had panned out for my career to go, but I had a superintendent and a good friend of mine who encouraged me to get involved with the AFW2 program. And at first, with resistance, I didn't want to do that. I felt this was a sacred program for other people that have suffered a lot worse than I have. I didn't feel that I fit that bill. And since I've been involved with AFW2, my first event that I went to was in April 2016 at Eglin Air Force Base, and I competed this past summer in the Warrior Games. This program is huge. It's so crucial and vital to each wounded warrior, whether it's combat injuries or non-combat injuries. And there's different portions to this AFW2 program, and one of those portions of the program is the caregiver support portion, and that portion is very vital because many of us go through so much. We've endured so much, and having your spouse or your significant other, or in some cases with other wounded warriors, they have maybe another family member or a special friend who is their caregiver. But caregivers play an important role in the recovery process that we go through. And for me, obviously that's my wife, who's been by my side since I was first injured, and she's actually enrolled as a caregiver in the AFW2 program. And AFW2 saves lives. This program really, really helps people when it comes to their recovery process and helping them overcome those wounds and injuries and illnesses that they've suffered because of their service.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Trace Crawford, Senior Clinical Scientist at Leidos, retired Air Force as well. I'm going to present to y'all, Arkansas. I'm going to present to you today some health-related initiatives that Leidos is performing right now for the MHS. Some of them support the entire beneficiary population. Others, as you will see, focus more narrowly on subpopulations. For today's discussion, the invisibly wounded and those who are transitioning from the DoD to the VA. I'd like to start with the nurse advice line. Leidos designed and implemented the first ever military health system CONUS nurse advice line, and we're now in our 5th year of managing that program. It provides 24/7 beneficiary access to nurse triage, registered nurse triage, and post-triage activities to include MTF appointment setting. To date, we've handled about 2 million calls, 30,000 of which DHA has estimated have had to have EMS activated because they were deemed to be in a potentially life-threatening situation. One of the things I'd like to point out, Leidos is a technology company. One of the things I'd like to point out is that the programs themselves are important, but the underlying science and technology infrastructures that support these programs are really the key element to help us as a company provide input to DHA, the services, and to the MTFs to help them improve the effectiveness and efficiency of care. For example, the nurse advice line collects routine data, a lot of routine data on the calls that it receives. For instance, day of week of the call, time of day of the call, and these data points have been a primary data input request from DHA and the services and the MTFs as they are trying to use this demand data to better construct their clinic schedules so that they can keep up with the patient demand. Another program that the NAL supports is the new next generation medical record, electronic medical record called MHS Genesis. And what this program will do ultimately is provide a single platform that for the first time ever integrates outpatient data, inpatient data, dental data, medical data, all across the care compendium from point of injury or diagnosis all the way through tertiary care in the MTFs. It also importantly provides communication with VA medical centers and with our network partner providers to try and improve continuity of care. It's been successfully deployed now at Fairchild Air Force Base, Naval Hospital Oak Harbor. Next week goes to Bremerton. When it's finally implemented totally in 2022, it will be the nation's largest integrated inpatient-outpatient electronic medical record. Leidos has a team of research scientists based in San Diego, and they support the Naval Center for Combat and Operational Stress Control. They support that program by mining data, Navy data, from Navy databases and analyzing it. For example, there's one Navy database that will follow wounded service members from the point of injury all the way through all of the treatment outcomes. And then these research scientists are using various analytic techniques to include modeling and simulation to try and determine what's the best pattern of care. How can we best serve this population? And it's gratifying to know that there have been many of their findings that have actually been incorporated into the healthcare policies and procedures to try and pursue that best practice. We also support the VA. There's a Leidos company called QTC Medical Services that's the only provider of VA medical disability examinations for the medical disability examination program of the VA. And that program's function is to try and coordinate the separation physicals with DOD and the VA physicals so that transitioning service members don't get stuck with having several redundant, unnecessary exams at the same time. QTC averages about 15,000 appointments per exams per month. And I'd like to close on a research initiative that Leidos is doing. It's not quite ready for prime time yet, but as a healthcare provider, I think it has some power. It's called CARE C2, and what Leidos has done with appropriate permissions is adapting the Air Force mission planning system software into the healthcare environment. What the software does is pull from disparate sources like maps and weather and photos, puts it all into an integrated package that the mission planners can use to make them more efficient. And if you think about it from a healthcare perspective, that's exactly how our healthcare system works. We have disparate care provided all over, pharmacies, supermarkets for that matter, single doctor's offices, urgent care centers, pretty much none of which talk with each other. So the goal here is to try and adapt this software into healthcare and see if we can pull from these disparate sources an integrated platform that will enable providers to be able to look at the entire patient picture, if you will, and better determine what are the next steps in care. There are a couple of examples. One is with a civilian facility trying to use this data to see can they predict the onset of sepsis, septicemia, overwhelming infection. And another pilot at the VA would be can they use this system to better manage in ongoing fashion their post-trauma stress patients. So thank you. There's a lot more, but thank you for allowing me to talk about this. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Crawford. And clearly, the technology really is driving some of the much-needed change that we need across the healthcare industry. And as a follow-on to your comment about using technology to track, patient demand, One of the questions from the audience is, what are we doing about the shortage of mental health providers? I mean, there is a huge demand for mental health providers, and it seems like the lines are long, and there's the appointments are short and getting shorter. And ma'am, I don't know if perhaps that's a question you could address for us.
Thank you. That is definitely one of the biggest challenges that we have from a resourcing standpoint. I mentioned the core team, and the core team is a team of folks that represents all of our functional communities. Our medical community, the SG, is a huge part of that whole effort. And it's very clear that we do have a shortage of mental health providers, not only, quite frankly, in the DoD, but society at large. There's a shortage of mental health providers. It's a challenge. The VA has actually some very great resources with regards to mental health, and we look to them quite a bit to help us understand a lot of the mental health challenges. But specific physical mental health providers at our base level is a huge challenge. We've got it as one of our core team initiatives, so we have specific areas that we're trying to increase those numbers and ensure we've got more mental health providers available to folks. We are working closely with organizations like RAND to help us look at how long does it take people to get through the appointment system, and what are some of those challenges? How do we get after some of that? There's some good study work that's been done along those lines. It's a big area. We encourage you to seek out those mental health providers that are at your base level, however, because the ones that we have are excellent, and they're part of that team of folks, team of health providers that are there to really ensure that those who are suffering with invisible wounds or family members that are affected by invisible wounds have access. So it's a challenge. We're working on it very hard, but there are definitely some resources for you as well.
Ma'am, as a follow-up to that conversation, you mentioned seek help, but there's also a stigma frequently in the Air Force with seeking help that if you seek mental health, it'll end your career. So, what are we doing? What is the Air Force doing about that stigma, and what tools are available for squadron commanders and first sergeants to help them, help destigmatize what's the invisible wounds?
Well, thanks for that question as well. And, maybe the chief might want to offer something to that, too, from the Air Force Wounded Warrior Program. I know they're very focused on this specific challenge. Stigma is another area that our core team is looking at. In fact, our core team is looking at 4 primary areas. We're looking at the process, the continuum of care, things like where are the gaps, how long does it take to get certain things done. We're looking at policy and training. And what can we give to commanders and first sergeants to help them understand the challenges that many airmen with invisible wounds face, and the resources that are available to them at the base level through the MFLEX that we talked about in the earlier session, the Military Family Life Counselors, the Airmen in Readiness Center, the healthcare facilities, the chaplain. There's a whole score of resources that are available at the base level, at the installation level, and we're encouraging and working closely with commanders to seek those out and to help point their families to them so that they can get the additional help that they need, and recognize a lot of it really comes down with, from a stigma standpoint, is just recognizing that the wounds exist. The wounds exist. And a third part of our program is looking at culture. And the vision of our whole Invisible Wounds initiative, I have some pamphlets up here if you want to come get them later on, talks a lot about how we're trying to address the stigma and how we're trying to get at the culture and how we're trying to create this expected environment that anybody in the military, anybody, airmen, family members, can expect an environment of openness, trust, and support. And if they have an issue, whether it's combat related or not, not all invisible wounds are combat related. Certainly some of the most critical ones are, and we've got to get after those. But there's a lot of people that just have an invisible wound and need a place to go and talk. And we want to create that expected environment all the way down to it really comes down to the unit level. And then the fourth area is the resources and getting at some of those things like mental health providers that I talked about. But I would encourage each one of you in this room can do something to help us address stigma. And it begins with just recognizing that the wounds exist. The wounds exist inside many of you. What can you do to open yourself up to somebody who might be suffering?
Thank you. This is for Joshua and Mitchell, and then we'll get back to you, Chief. We've got another question for you following that. You know, what one piece of advice would you give to an airman who's suffered an invisible wound, who's, you know, whether that's in combat, again, whether it's on the home front? You've clearly both had great careers in the Air Force, and you've clearly overcome significant challenges. What advice would you give airmen to help them on their journey?
So first off, I'll just backtrack just a little bit, talk about my own personal experience. Like I mentioned earlier, I felt this program was really sacred and that I didn't belong. I felt it was for people that had suffered worse than me. When I went to my first AFW camp at Eglin Air Force Base in 2016, I listened to one of our AFW2 staff members during opening ceremonies talk about his own personal injuries and story. And he made the point. Everybody has a story. It doesn't matter if it's combat or non-combat related. It doesn't matter what those wounds, those illnesses, or those injuries are. You all have suffered in some way or another for the service that you've rendered to this nation. And that stuck with me. And immediately I felt like, you know what, I do belong here. I'm in the right place. And so many airmen are kind of afraid to go to their first camp because of what they're struggling or dealing with. Sometimes they may have leadership that doesn't support the AFW2 program. And they might have those who do support it and are pushing them to go, but they don't want to go. But since I've been a part of this program and I went to my first event, you'll listen to the staff talk to all the newcomers and say, hey, you might not want to be here, you might feel you don't belong here, but some point in time during your week here at this camp, you're going to have a change. And that change is going to be for the positive, and it's what you're going to take and what you make out of it and what you put into this week. Being here and opening up and starting your recovery process with other wounded warriors. And I've never, ever, since I've been a part of the program, experienced someone who got involved with the program and that wasn't affected positively by the program or said, man, I wish I wasn't here. And you hear everybody at the end of the week, man, I don't even want to go home. These are people who now have become my family. So no matter whether it's combat or non-combat related, when you're involved with the Wounded Warrior program, it's a family, and everybody's there to take care of each other. And the awesome thing is, like me and Mitch, we can sit down. We could go out in the civilian world. People don't understand, they don't relate to us. Me and him can sit down and we can talk about our injuries, and we're on the same page. And that's what this program is. And that's for everybody, and it's for the families and for your caregivers as well, everybody that's involved with it.
Thank you.
Listening to what Joshua says, it's kind of funny because we didn't plan on having the same answer, but really it just speaks monuments to mine being very similar to his. The fact that you can go to one of these care events. Now, let me just say, like, looking at myself, I've been athletic my whole life. I played football through college, basketball, track, football through high school, and then I was on the All Air Force triathlon team as well. So top 10 men and 6 women, Air Force wide, would go compete every year at the Armed Forces Championship. And then in 2013 and 2014, when I did Warrior Games, I also won the Ultimate Champion competition. Now, I'm also rated at 100% disability by both the VA and the Air Force because of the 7 broken vertebrae that led to all of the similar back issues that he had mentioned. Mine's a lot in the thoracic, and sitting down, you know, you're not going to know this because I'm not going to complain about it, but this isn't excruciating pain. And, you know, they put me on narcotics just to take a little of the edge off, but nonetheless, it's just proportionally what I got to deal with now. But without hearing someone voice what is going on inside them, there's that stigma. And whenever we go to these camps and events, I think that's the best thing for us, is that we know that we're not being judged. So it kind of sets you at ease. It kind of reboots you so that you're not having to be on guard. We can talk about things, and like you said, it doesn't matter if it's wounded in action or cancer or survivor or anything. It's just, you know, you've been through some sort of suffering together, or some aspect of your life that helped you grow, really. And it gives you that kind of setting at ease that allows kind of healing to happen. And it's the main thing is the pride aspect of it. So I've always been one that's been very type A, not wanting to ask for help, get help, tough everything out. So for me, the biggest thing, and what I would, want to tell someone else that's going through the same issue, is to swallow the pride. That's been the biggest issue that I've seen and that I've dealt with, is that pride has held a lot of my recovery back and a lot of others. So understanding that it's not shameful, and no matter what other people think, the fact is, it's none of your business what other people think of you. And for a while, I would need that validation from others, and so I would just hide a lot of that stuff that ended up compounding and making things a whole lot worse in the end. So that would kind of be my biggest thing, is to say, stop letting pride kind of affect you, and really, for me, if I wasn't actively going towards some purpose or helping others, being selfless, then I would succumb to isolation. So for those that don't have wounds, but possibly know others that may have some invisible wounds going on, the thing is to really pay attention to that and know that when they are kind of going into that isolation mode, that's when you got to kind of pull them out of it. So when I've done that, and AFA has actually helped me quite a bit, because now that I'm on the permanent retired disability list, the funding is kind of cut in those aspects, and AFA now picks up that check. And in the last couple months, I've been dealing with another kind of round of issues. It's going to be a sine wave every month that you're dealing with anything. But I was on a low, and I really needed that pick-me-up, and AFA was able to get me out to one of the care events, and I was able to be a mentor, and it sparked that mode to stop concentrating so much on myself and obsessing over that, and giving the view of proportionality.
Thank you for those remarks. Chief Johnson, we've talked a little bit about the AFW2 programs, but could you explain a little bit how, if you're out in the field and you have an injury, how does the process work? I mean, do they come first to you, and then do you send airmen out to various resources like Air Force Aid Society, AFA? Like, how does the process? And then talk a little bit, if you would, about the care camps. Like, what exactly does CARE stand for?
Okay, so to be enrolled in the AFW2 program, it's actually pretty simple. You can be referred by a spouse, anybody in your chain of command. You could refer yourself. It used to be the days long old where you had to be in the MEB process and you were referred at that point, but we've opened that aperture up to make sure that we can enroll anyone who qualifies under any certain wounded, ill, or injured circumstance. There is a list that the DoD made. However, also on this list, there's also this thing called any complicated injury or illness, which gives my boss and I the authority to determine what complicated means. So you're welcome to refer yourself. Obviously, simple flu that's not going to do it. But as long as we have the resources to care for wounded, ill, or injured airmen, we will accept most cases into the program. And we'll case manage all the way through. But you can go to the website, woundedwarrior.mil. Nicole, is that right? .af.mil. She keeps me in line. Thank you. And there's a really simple form. You fill out some stuff, and it goes directly to an org box, and then it's evaluated. Or you can contact your local Airmen and Family Readiness Center, who can get you in contact with your recovery care coordinator. They're done by region, so you may not have one necessarily at your installation. They can review your case, forward the information to us. contact your chain of command. They should be able to contact your local RCC as well. Of course, you can go to the website. On the website, there's a 1-800 number. You can call that. There's a variety of, you can stop by our booth down at the end of the hallway. We have cards, we have resources, we have booklets, we have everything you could possibly think of. Fidget spinners, maybe we might have a couple left. She's hiding the last few because they were a big hit. And they all have our resources listed. You can tweet us, you can Facebook us, you can Instagram us. All of that is a way to find a resource, a way to get referred to, or to find information out about our program. What was the second?
Chief, you mentioned the recovery care coordinator, and one of the questions was, is there a plan to actually have one at every base?
So feasibly, that's not going to be an option. There are some installations where the population is just too small to actually have an RCC at every installation. We are, however, putting together a plan to see in some regions, it may make more sense to have more than one in a region. When they travel, for instance, an hour and a half to 2 hours to get to an installation to care for more than one wounded, you're then probably on the road for a day and you're seeing only maybe 2 or 3 airmen. So in those areas, it may make sense to have more than one. So we are actually putting together a recommendation now about how many we may need in certain regions to up that number and then identify the resource and send it forward. But we're getting full support in order to be able to increase those numbers to make it happen, to have them more readily available in those higher populated areas.
And there are some programs that are covered and some that are not, correct? I mean, there's some funding that there have been some recent changes in funding on who we can send to the care camps.
Correct. Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that it changed. What happened is there was a recent interpretation of the law.
That's
that
the lawyers
changed
out there interpreting the law.
For care events, it's part of the Wounded Warrior program where we have, we call regional care events. And it was at one point we were sending anyone who was on the temporary disability retired list, TDRL, and individuals permanently retired to these care events. And in a recent interpretation of the actual law, we found that we were not allowed to be spending federal money sending individuals on permanent disability retirement to those events. And as you heard, it's not just those individuals who are temporarily retired or going through the MB process or any of that who benefit from these care events. Even individuals who are permanently retired can go down that rabbit hole and at some point feel disconnected and alone. So it's vital that we keep those individuals as part of our Air Force family, as airmen for life, to be connected and to have a resource. And so AFA stepped up immediately once they heard that this had happened and said, hey, what can we do to help? And they offered under their Wounded Airmen program to assist in funding a certain number of our wounded, ill or injured on the permanent disability retired list to attend care events and Invictus games, Warrior games, whatever they can do to ensure that we stay connected and we can still stay connected to our ambassadors, our mentors, and our permanently disabled wounded to stay connected as our Air Force family. And that is huge because, as Mitch said, it's huge for them to stay connected, stay a part of a family, to know that they have a connection out there. If they ever need someone, they know someone is still there. And we hear it repeatedly at care events that they may have been in a hole and that this was the one thing that kept them from making a bad decision.
And can you
irreversible
clarify
decision.
what CARE stands for, the acronym CARE?
Nicole, you want to help me out?
I got you.
And these are all the programs that are encompassed as part of this all different. Okay, great. Thank you.
I need all the support I can get, clearly.
One of the last questions here before we've got a few more minutes has to do with the MEB process, the Medical Evaluation Board. Why does the process take so long? Process alone can trigger depression and PTSD. What is it that we can do to improve it? And, you know, as part of the whole medical evaluation process, do folks who are going through the board process get access to all these different programs that we're talking about here, the Invisible Wounds, AFW2, the nonprofits that support? So two questions there.
Who's this question for? Is this for me
Whoever
and
would
Mick?
like to take a stab at that.
So I'll take a stab at her. I'll take a go at her. Okay, yes, it is a very grueling process. However, I will say that as part of the Invisible Wounds Initiative, we have looked at significantly at the entire process from start to finish. And we realize that there is some frustration. And we actually just a week ago had a very long 8-hour working group meeting where we discussed timing was one of, we spent a lot of time, and Michelle's nodding her head, we spent a lot of time on the frustrations that airmen have about the length of time it takes in certain parts of the process. So we take it very seriously. We understand it can be frustrating. Understanding that, we are making strides and trying to do the best that we can from all aspects of notifying airmen at every step of the way. So one of the latest initiatives has been to notify an airman and their commander every time that their status has changed or their package has moved. So anytime from the first moment that you're notified of the MEB process to the next step, there should be an immediate notification. This is a very recent change. So that now, instead of sitting there wondering where you are through every step of the phase, at least now you're aware, and then who to contact. Now, is it perfect process? I'm not going to sit here and tell you it is. We all know that every time we make a change, there's going to be a part that didn't work out well. So we welcome your feedback for those of you who are recently enrolled.
And from your personal experience, Joshua and Mitchell, did you feel that these types of changes would have helped you as you went through the process, or?
So I actually have a very positive experience with my MEB and my VA process, one of the very few that I've heard of, fortunately enough for me. So my MEB process that I went through in my VA disability, I found out that there's 4 keys to the process being effective and positive. Obviously, number 1 is yourself as the member, the wounded person. Your commander, your squadron commander, your Pueblo office, and then if you're involved in the AFW2 program, your recovery care coordinator. Luckily for me, I retired out of Ellsworth Air Force Base last November, so the recovery care coordinator there, John Huff, he is outstanding. So those 4 people, if you got, and your PCM, did I mention PCM? Your PCM is huge as well. If you guys are all on the same page, the process goes a lot smoother. And then when you involve your VA representative for the VA side of it, that's another aspect. If you've got one person in that link that doesn't support you as a member, whether he thinks whatever you want to do, whether you're trying to retire and separate or to stay in and fight to stay in and serve, if one of those people is off, the whole process is going to drag out and take longer. So fortunately for me, we were all on the same page, and as the wounded member myself, you've got to be on top of your paperwork. You've got to be making phone calls. You can't just sit back and expect someone else to take care of everything for you. So my experience was very positive. My MEB process, from the time it was initiated to when I started my terminal leave, was only about a 4-month process. And then including my VA process with that, I had no hiccups or no issues, and I'm 100% permanent and total disabled veteran. So mine worked out fantastic for me. You might hear something different. I don't know.
Mitch, thoughts?
My MEB was more or less a just follow-on to the medical treatment I was receiving. So, as I had mentioned, there's all the after effects for me that had caused the most issues. So, having the TBI, at first it was just, the spaciness and the cognitive issues, but then it became, and the headaches, and, dealing with the pain of the spinal fractures and things like that. But then, a couple years down the road, the hypothalamus pituitary axis started malfunctioning, so now all endocrine issues arise. So you're not producing the proper cortisol to handle stress, testosterone, hypothyroidism is an issue, so then you got the fatigue aspect of it. And so I was going to 40 hours a month, easy, of provider appointments, and really not seeing much of a benefit. And it was the AFW2 program that provided what I needed. So at that time, I was a patient, and patient really means, one who suffers. And, natural suffering provides that proportionality, but you want to minimize what you don't have to. And suffering itself is that one thing that unites caregiver and care receiver. So, as we realize as humans, where healing happens, it's in compassion or empathy, suffering together. And that's what AFW2 provided. And I had a negative situation in the closest, one to me that was supposed to be my caregiver was not providing that. And as a caregiver, you know, you're supposed to be helping relieve suffering versus adding to the pile. So AFW2 almost saved me because I was really going down, you know, another route where I was almost forcibly isolated and in negative situations, but getting to some of these camps and throughout my whole treatment process as well as the MEB process was what allowed me to keep my head up.
Thank you. All right, we've got time. I've got so many questions up here, so I'm going to try to get a few more in here before the panel wraps up. But for Dr. Crawford, you mentioned earlier, you know, that the technology is really key to tracking spikes in when patient care is, so that care providers can figure out, you know, when are the best hours to set. Does the technology also enable you to sort of track some of the problems that are creeping up? For example, there's a huge opioid epidemic now in the United States, and I would imagine a lot of, you know, people who have experienced these illnesses get put on a lot of different types of medication that potentially could cause some addictions. Is the technology that advanced to help us with that? And I'm curious your thoughts on that.
I'll take a stab at that, but I probably will refer to you guys. From my perspective at Leidos, don't deal with that. So I'm not sure that I can give you an answer. I can research that, and whoever asked the question, if you can meet me after, we can arrange to get you an answer.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think it probably addresses the overall opioid problem across which I'm sure our medical community is actively tracking too on the Air Force side. Okay, 2 more quick questions here. General Crider, how do we fix confidentiality issues? If an airman says they're having suicidal thoughts, the provider has to tell their commander, and this deters people from being honest.
Yeah, so that's a tough one. So there's, you know, our providers are very astute at understanding how to address issues of confidentiality. But certainly, if somebody confides that they are going to hurt themselves, we all want to make sure that we can take appropriate action and provide them with the support that they need. Because I think studies have shown that they've gone down a hole that they don't want to be in. And if they've made that confession, they've actually made that confession because they're looking for help. So there are definitely fine lines to, you know, what information is conveyed and what you do with that information. But I think it's safe to say that if somebody says they're going to hurt themselves, you want to take action.
Thank you. I've got time for one more question, and I saved this one to the end because it's obviously a personal question that someone in the audience submitted, and I thank you for doing so. It's been 9 years since my husband's suicide. My family is ready to relive our story to help others transition from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, to PTG, post-traumatic PTG, post-traumatic grow. How do we do that? How do we help folks, and how do we help folks who have experienced this tragedy tell their story and come out on the other end? I'll leave that to anyone on the panel here who'd like to share their thoughts.
This is a perfect way to do that, actually. Anytime that you have the opportunity to tell your story, tell it. This is one of the going back to the question about destigmatizing mental health, telling your story is the way to destigmatize it, and being able to talk about whatever has happened in your family situation, whether it's you directly or a family member, is the way to do that. And that's how you share your growth. And it teaches others that you don't have to stay stuck in that realm, that there is such a thing called post-traumatic growth. You can grow from whatever that serious issue was. You can grow from it. It may take time, but you can grow from it. And everybody grows at their own rate, and everybody grows in their own way. So take whatever opportunity you can to talk about it. Talk to wherever you are in the room. Take a moment to talk to the person sitting next to you and share the story. Because chances are, everyone in this room is in this room for a reason. And they're affected in some way personally by some type of an invisible wound. So I'm sure that they would love to hear your story. feel free to stop by our booth and talk to us. There might be something there. There might be a story in it that we could relate to, or that we could talk to or talk through. Feel free to talk to Josh or Mitch. Maybe they'd like to hear it. Maybe they would like to share with you. Talk to anybody, because I'm sure somebody wants to hear it, and at some point, your story will help someone else tell theirs.
Thanks.
There you go.
All right, the clapping next door is my cue, I think. Did you want to close with one quick remark here?
Sure. I would think that the main aspect of moving from PTSD to PTG, I like that, I'm going to use that, has been really just the way that you view everything, whether life happens to you or happens for you. And it's that victim mentality versus a survivorship mentality. So realizing that what you're going through is actually for the growth. It's actually for another purpose. Breaks you out of that mold to then allowing yourself to heal. Otherwise, you're always going to be stuck in that rut, thinking that, saying, why me? But that doesn't help anyone out. So, and for caregivers, that's the best thing they can do is support the fact that they keep, pointing to the fact that there's always that silver lining. The grass may be greener on the other side, but it's probably because the water bill's higher. So, if this didn't happen to me, I would have lost out on a lot of amazing experiences. So.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, next question.
Mitch made the comment earlier, it's about swallowing your pride. And you've got to swallow that pride, you've got to share your story, you've got to listen to those who are supporting you and trying to help you. I can say that since I've been involved with AFW2 and competing in this past summer's Warrior Games, there's many teammates, Mitch can probably say the same thing because he's competed as well. Very close friends that I've made through this program. Some of them tried to commit suicide, tried to end their life. They've competed in the Warrior Games just like us. We've been side by side to each other as brothers and sisters, and they opened up, they shared their story, they took advantage of the opportunities that programs like AFW2 provide. And they're going and competing in adaptive sports, and they're winning medals and supporting in other ways. And you've got people here like Mitch, who he's going for his second year in a row to compete in Invictus Games. And if you've never watched some of these programs, turn the TV on in the summer, watch the Warrior Games, watch the Invictus Games. If you've never been to an AFW2 camp, take the opportunity to go and see what those who have suffered and have struggled from. And you'd probably be pretty amazed at some of the stories and the things that go on with non-combat and combat indivisible wounds and visible wounds.
Thank you. All right, so we're definitely out of time now. So I just want to thank all the audience for all your fabulous questions. I got a stack of them here. I'm sorry that we didn't get to all of them. Thank you to our panel, and I just wanted to take a special time to thank our 2 wounded airmen who courageous and got up here today and told their story. And thank you all so much. Appreciate it.